Good evening, everyone. We are back in open session. It remains the 20th of February at 7:52 here in the Fisher Administration Building. Welcome if you're joining us online. Our next item up is a discussion regarding the creation of task force to address strategic objectives 6.1, 6.2, and 6.4. Dr. Meads.
Thank you. The title of the task force that we would like you to consider as a board is TOSA 2075. Now, you may look at that title and say 2075, but there are young people who are in our elementary schools right now that if our community is vibrant and we want them to come back and raise their families and raise their children in this community, the footprint of this school district should be shaped and discussed now, and it very, very easily will impact the vision of this community in 2075. In front of you, board members, and we will upload this document to Board Docs momentarily. But what I've noticed in my year and a half, almost 2 years here now, is that there are one-off conversations that we're continuously responding to and reacting to and not being very strategic around. And they range from our long-range and long-term facility needs of the school district. It ranges through how we want to approach and address our enrollment formula with 5113, how we want to implement policy 5120. And when I think about those things, it gets down to, do we currently have the classroom space needed to meet the policies we have? Do we have the classroom space needed to meet the curricular vision of the future? Do we have certain lottery school admission considerations that we should think about for certain neighborhoods? Are there other strategies to best increase resident enrollment figures? Is there other ways to use magnet school programming or specialty school programming like Montessori, for example? The concept of having a discussion in 2023 for the future around transportation services. The volume of traffic in this community during the work week is heavy and is not what it was 15 years ago. And so in certain portions of this community, it's difficult for a young person, especially on the west side, to get from their neighborhood to their secondary campus. And how do you navigate that conversation? And then finally, developing a long-range financial strategy that uses specific key financial indicators with comparable southeastern Wisconsin school districts. So when you consider all of those different components, this conversation around where we want to be in the next 50 years or so is really critical. And instead of us taking it piecemeal, Mr. Brightman and I believe it's appropriate for us to step back and to take a very comprehensive, very deep dive in discussing all of these different things. So I'll pause and see if you have any questions or.
What do you envision the joint ownership of the city look like?
I think it would be critical for us to have.
Like at what level? Just trying to imagine, like at what level is appropriate for this type of.
I would hope. So there's Mr. Brightman's peer position in the city. He talks to that person constantly.
Okay.
But I think that we would have to have ex officio members from the city that are part of this task force as well. Not only the financial leader, but also I think Mr. Archambault would be really important to be a sitting member of this task force.
Do they have a city planner on staff?
I'm not sure. I don't know.
It's like today, right? The 20-story apartment building is going to be a car wash.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, that's a big change, right? And so there's lots of things, lots of moving pieces like that. That's great. That's great. I love that.
Other questions, Mr. Meyer?
So many years ago, I went to a state bar presentation where they had a futurist. And so do we have any futurists available to be in this task force in Wauwatosa? Or, I mean, it takes a special kind of thinker to do that kind of work. And and also, I don't think that 40 years is so unbelievable. I came to Wauwatosa in 1988, and we're 35 years from that point, and so much is the same, but so much is different. And so, but I think that's what you're trying to say, right? That,
I will, yes, I will just extend that. Let me answer your first portion first. Wauwatosa, I believe, is such a rich and amazing community because we have amazing people who live in this place, and they have many skills. We may have multiple futurists who are available and ready to volunteer on this task force. But if we don't have someone in that space, the task force can bring a futurist in to help guide the work. The concept of this title of Tulsa 2075, if I could take a point of personal privilege here, my Rotary group has a gentleman who was on the school board in the early 1980s, and he is very interested. Every once in a while, he'll ask me, how's the board doing? And he remembers with fondness, but also with agony. And I think many of you who will be leaving the board will do the same. Fondness and agony, but he remembers very vividly that he was on the board when they closed 3 different schools, including Fisher and Hawthorne. And there was an elementary school on the west side near the Webster. Thank you. So he remembers vividly the pain, but also he remembers the process of then re-imaging the school system. And he takes pride in the fact that 40 some odd, almost 50 years later, the footprint has remained the same. But he's then, every time he'll remind me, he said, but I did my job and it's almost been 50 years ago. What's the next iteration of this? What like now? And so that's kind of the genesis around this task force work.
Mr. Riley.
Just 2 thoughts similar to Mr. Phillips. When I did the first quick skim of this, my first question was around, is it TOSA active TOSA? Like all the green space and like will rec department, how do we include that in this thinking and expanding just our programming in general for seniors, disability, folks with disabilities, et cetera. And then the second question is about the county. So it's different places have different approaches to schools. Some are county schools, some are city schools, et cetera. I think because we have county parks that run through TOSA, and because I feel like TOSA is such an important part of Milwaukee County, I do wonder how county supervisors or county, I don't know what it would be, county planners, whatever, they, what information could they bring to inform? And I'm not saying that so that we lose the TOSA feel, but just that, again, I think access to information, because we're so greatly impacted by what happens in Montgomery, that's where he's in Milwaukee County in general. So those are my 2 thoughts.
Thank you. Mr. Meyer.
yes, somehow I ask that you look at the successes and the mistakes and the decisions of the past. That maybe success, we needed to close Webster. I've never been here when Webster was around. That we needed to close Fisher, but we kept the land. And now I certainly wish we had the Hawthorne property still, right? Because how do you have an elementary school in that part of town? We wish we'd had a bigger footprint. those are other boards' decisions. What about the board I was on in 2008? Was there a site available to purchase to have a place to build a field house? We missed opportunities. I was there. That was right, arguably. So those kinds of decisions about whether to buy or sell footprint, we need some people to give us that futurist look on that things, because all of the boards have done some things right and done some things, I wish I'd done that differently. So those futurist people, I don't know where they come from, but just to put that out there.
Dr. Hoek.
I'm really excited about this. I think, like many people, I've been having discussions with parents at specific schools that are, raising concerns. And I think, it does make a lot of sense to be more strategic in the planning and more broad instead of addressing one specific school's needs, but rather, how do we make decisions around all of our schools? And that will impact then, of course, each of the schools. I love the idea of including somebody from the city. I know they really, my understanding is that many members of the Common Council and other members of the city would really enjoy partnering with our district. And I don't know if people have had an opportunity to see the housing study and needs assessment the city did in February. It's really remarkable, and there's quite a bit of overlap with things that we're looking at regarding resident enrollment and then kind of what the city is doing. Obviously, I would think that the group we're using for the resident the resident study, I assume that data would go to this group as part of their decision-making process?
Yes.
Okay. And then I don't see any specification, but would we ask this group to also consider our boundary lines? Would that be part of the discussion of our physical spaces?
I think that would be covered under 5120 as from an assignment in district, because in that policy it talks about boundary lines.
It does, you're right.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Just two things. I would like to see educational innovation of educational programming. For example, what could impact this is, I know we have the issue of how to place students, but if, for example, if we chartered a whole neighborhood to a certain program, or, would that be included here? That would change the footprint. For example,
with the fourth sub point under, so bullet point number 2, fourth sub point, would that address it?
well, I don't know if it would.
Okay.
Because, we have 4 new schools that are joined for, specific, different age groups, and they're constructed to have multi-age classrooms. And we can do, we also have a program here in the Fisher Building where we also have multi-age classrooms. So a number of different educational programs could fit in that structure.
Sure.
And I want to be mindful of not just enrollment, current physical buildings and geographics, but also the educational needs and what we want to provide, what we see on the horizon as educational educational needs that will more stimulate our students in the structure that we can create. So looking at additional property, we heard that mentioned earlier. Can we look at possibly additional property footprints, not just existing footprint? People have talked long about relocating different programs, like the rec department has occupied different spaces in the district over a number of years. The administrative team doesn't necessarily have to have this particular space. Just thinking more futuristic, right? So that's what I would add, not just looking at current and enrollment and existing educational programs, but somehow branching into what's possible
Yes, ma'am.
and not being constrained.
Got it.
I know we have several other things on the agenda. I want to make a few comments on this. I am really, Dr. Means and I have been talking about this, and I'm really excited about this comprehensive examination of stepping back. Ms. Biefeld, your point of there is, as we consider our footprint, it's not necessarily getting smaller. It could be building in some different creative ways. For me, this idea of what type of buildings, what type of footprint, what are we trying to deliver 50 years from now? STEM was not a thing 30 years ago. What is the future? And what types of buildings do we need? What classrooms do we need? And how do all these things fit together? We've got our 3-year strategic plan that's driving us forward to a certain vision and so on. And I love the idea of thinking out much further of what could we be? What do we want to be? How do we enact this as a community? And how might we prepare ourselves going forward? So I think there's a lot of opportunity here. I see Ms. Willis has her hand up. Thank you. I appreciate the hand. And then I'll come back to the room, and if not, we'll move on to our next agenda item. Ms. Willis.
Yeah, just a quick comment. I don't have the document in front of me, but I'm very excited about this idea. I think as a teacher, just having that lens of what can we do that's innovative, and how can we really make sure that we're getting stakeholders across our community, right? Because we just have, I think, a wealth of resources here with our council, with hospitals, with higher education institutes, with our rec department. So how can we kind of rethink the future and what our community members want? Is that a field house? Is that a career center, right? There's so many opportunities. So I'm really excited about this idea and excited to hear more about it and how we're going to engage all of those stakeholders. Thank you.
Thank you all. This will certainly come back to the board again for consideration and comment and a vote if we want to launch it. But we were excited about it. Since we were gathering tonight, wanted to kind of bundle this with a few other conversations to get it on folks' radar as soon as possible. So before we get a chance to consider, before we move forward. Next up on our agenda is discussion regarding school board collaboration related to school discipline. I would share that, think of this as meeting 1.0 on this. We talked about this at our board meeting last Monday. Dr. Means is here to talk a little bit about us, and then we will agenda another conversation, the second at least. I don't know if we'll have a third, but that we'll have at least one more conversation on this as well. And I would again.
Well, we have until April 23rd, so we could meet a lot. So what you have in front of you, and I appreciate the tee up, Dr. Jessup Anger. At the core, we are really excited to have this conversation with our board, with our school principals and Mr. Pinion here. The scheduling of this meeting happened quickly, and we didn't want to lose your desire to at least start this conversation right away. So this is kind of a preview, but I can tell you that our principals and Mr. Pinion and Ms. O'Connor, who you all heard from last week, they're very anxious to have this conversation with you. When we have the conversation of discipline, I think it's really important, and I'm starting with the document that has the title, When is an Administrative Hearing Necessary? So typically what happens is if a student engages in behavior that is so egregious that it requires a 5-day suspension, that is the maximum amount of a suspension that an administrator can provide. So we should stop there for a second. When we say we're suspending you for 5 days, we're typically saying we need to now schedule an administrative hearing within the 5 days. and we're delivering that message of we have to have the hearing within 5 days, because the next step in the process is for us to either decide if we're going to present a student to the board for an expulsion hearing, or do we need to find alternative placement for the student, or in a unique case, the student returns back after 5 days. Please note what I said is in the unique case that they're suspended for 5 days and then they come back. When we have levied at the school level a 5-day suspension, we are signaling to the family and to the student that something else is happening, that we need to have the hearing, the administrative hearing within 5 days to determine what the next steps are. For a regular education student, and I'm going to pause after I get to this point. For a regular education student, we have the ability to suspend them for a maximum of 15 days. That's for the entire school year. So we have to be really careful. For a special education student, that number is reduced down to 10. So if a student is identified as having special needs, then we only have 10 days that we can suspend. So I want to pause here because I don't want to do a lot of talking. I want to pause and see if you have any questions on student A does something, they're suspended for 5 days. What's our thinking? Good? Yes, sir.
I'm not quite sure what you're saying here, and what you're asking us this on the fly to say yes, thumbs up, thumbs down to.
No, I'm not asking. This is what. That's what we do. So
that's
we're not
what you
seeking
do.
permission.
Yeah. Okay, good. Because all of a sudden, after I asked that question, it's like, no, we can't say thumbs up, thumbs down here, and at this meeting. But still, I don't want to. Oh, okay. There's a whole other half to this that I think if we address the other half, it informs our disciplinary question.
Okay.
And that's the safety question.
Mm-hmm.
That because if somebody's doing something that needs discipline, because it has to do with, as this, the statutes say, in the expulsion hearing, what are the grounds for expulsion, safety, whatever. Okay. So I think the whole state of Wisconsin needs to start looking at this from the safety question to say, what does everybody else need to be safe? And I'm not into punishing people. I'm into keeping people safe. And I think coming at it from the other side of the equation helps inform what is reasonable and rational on the discipline side. That I'm not like dying on a hill for discipline. I'm dying on a hill for safety and the victims and things like that. And then maybe whatever we want to do for discipline or molding of the behavior of the person who is doing the behaviors we don't like, maybe that changes because our objective isn't discipline, it's safety. So maybe our dispositions and our strategies start to be different. Maybe we can do something that provides more safety, but is less for the for the victim, but isn't as restrictive on the perpetrator because we looked at it from a safety perspective instead of a restricting the perpetrator perspective.
Mr. Meyer, are you talking yourself, are you describing your own internal thinking of how your thinking's changed over time?
I'm trying to figure out how we can solve the problem when we don't have a status, we don't have a world we like right now. There's things we don't like going on. And I keep hearing, me too, everybody, we need more discipline. We need more law and order. Well, okay, that's true. But when we look at a child who's done something wrong that has harmed other children, we craft an outcome, a disciplinary decision for the child. And we craft it in terms of, there's all kinds of theories of discipline and punishment. Well, what specific things what's an appropriate punishment or discipline? I want to ask, why would we do a discipline action that does not affect the safety need of the victim? Saying what would our recommendations for disciplinary specifics be different if we looked at it from a safety goal instead of a punitive goal? And I truly know tonight we're talking, believe that we might have disciplinary dispositions that are different if our goal is safety rather than punishment.
So that's a great launch point. I don't think they're mutually exclusive.
Right, I know they're not.
Right. And so I think it'll ultimately come down to where the board wants to rest. Because candidly, so going through this document a little bit more, if a student, so I went to pause to make sure that we were all on the same page in regards to how an administrative hearing happens. It's important to know that if a student who is identified with special needs has a situation, instead of us moving directly to an administrative hearing, we have something called a manifestation determination. That manifestation determination hearing is held for the sole purpose of discussing if the identified needs of the student was the catalyst for the behavior. So I want to say that again. If you are a student who has identified with having special needs and you are part of a disciplinary situation, the law states that we're supposed to have something called a manifestation determination. If the student has been identified with having certain special needs and those special needs was the catalyst for the behavior, then the law typically states then we have an obligation to put in place additional interventions, that we're unable to move forward with discipline. But in some cases, a student may have special education needs, but those needs are not the catalyst for the behavior. So you have to have the hearing to determine if that's the case or not.
Is that only true? I'm sorry, I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
Is that only true to get to the point of expulsion, or is that also true for suspensions or other disciplinary action?
It should be the case for any disciplinary action for a student with special needs.
The reason I ask is I certainly know we have students in our district who are categorized under like the emotionally, I don't know what the official category, like EBD, category. And obviously to get that to be, to qualify for special education supports with that as your qualification, we would make an assumption that that student is probably fairly dysregulated.
Yes.
So how do we determine that from a disciplinary standpoint? Could you give me like an example of that? Because I really do, I have had people talk with me about that. I struggle to kind of understand how we both follow their special education needs and the law related to that, but also recognizing that there are behaviors that are so disruptive to the school that we need to have something else.
So Ms. Willis may want to weigh in here, but the way I understand it, Dr. Hoyk, is that within that student's IEP, you're trying to get to least restrictive environment. You're trying to figure out like what are the behavior modifications that are required in order for that student to be safe for themselves and around others.
Okay.
And so dependent on the severity of the diagnosis, that child may have to have an aide with them at all times. That child may need to have an aide in the room, et cetera. So when that child has an outburst or is dysregulated, like you have to look to see like, okay, were all of the, I don't know, blank on the word, all of the
Interventions.
Thank you, in place and being implemented, and thus was the bar met, if you will. And if within the IEP, certain things are stated and they were not being implemented or executed at that time, it's sort of like not the fault of the child, if you will. because their educational supports were not in place to help them dysregulate or to help them pull back. So oftentimes I think with IEPs, the first place you have to look as a district or as a teacher is like, was I actually meeting what I was supposed to be doing, which is incredibly difficult when, you're in these situations.
I'll pause and see if Ms. Willis, that was well done. Ms. Stacy Quinn would be very proud, but I'll defer to see if Ms. Willis has any additional comments.
Thank you. I think Ms. Fraley summed it up pretty well. A student who has that identification should really have a behavior intervention plan. And everyone who services that child should have access to the accommodations, the modifications, and the interventions used, to direct that student, simply put. And it could be a number of things. It could be a number of accommodations. It could be frequent breaks. It could be checking in with a trusted adult. Like, it could be a number of things, but it is the responsibility of the entire IEP team, which is any staff member really that comes in contact with that student, to know what that behavior intervention plan is and making sure that it's being implemented correctly.
So what's difficult is that if a student who has the identification of being EBD has a situation and is videotaped, and on video it looks apparent that they did something that was egregious and violates our school values, but the behavioral plan wasn't followed, or the staff member who's assigned to them wasn't where they were supposed to be, on the surface, the public will say, well, of course this student should go. But when we meet with our individual education plan team members and we identify that either the plan wasn't followed or certain components of the plan was shortcutted, what happens is that then that student is legally allowed to come back to school. That's the complexity of discipline, and where we can't just unilaterally implement zero tolerance type of policies.
And we can't share, obviously.
And we can't share the information.
That information about.
And that's frustrating for the public, and I understand.
Yeah.
Oh, could I just clarify the time frame and that these are out of school suspensions of up to 5 days?
Yes, ma'am.
So let me just clarify. So we have the severity level key for the disciplinary framework. Number 1 is conference intervention at the building or classroom level. Number 2 is in-school suspensions of up to 3 days. Number 3 is out-of-school suspension 1 to 3 days. And number 4 is out-of-school suspension up to 5 days. So I'm repeating that, and I'm sorry to do that. But I just really want to be clear. When does a special education services student, when does this trigger looking at their IEP, BIP, and their 504 plan? When is that? When do you intervene? On an out-of-school suspension of up to 5 days for the administrative hearing?
That's a fantastic question, Sharon. Thank you. It really depends on how egregious the behavior was. It depends on the case manager's management of the student and their situation. There may be something that's really egregious and it requires a 2-day suspension. For certain students, you could, especially a student who was identified as EBD, you could very easily suspend them weekly if you needed, if you, to Mr. Meyer's point, the safety of a child, of other students may be at risk. But if the plan isn't being followed, this is where our special education coordinators and Ms. Clem come into play, where they will say, well, while that student's behavior is interfering with other students, since we believe in inclusion in the Wauwatosa School District, that student has the right to ensure that their IEP is being implemented. And so what it would mean is that you have to be very judicious with those 10 days, because the maximum number of days that you can suspend a special education student is 10 days. So often we get into trouble at the school level where you suspend the student with the EBD behavior 3 different times for 3 days each, then the fourth issue comes up. There's only 1 day left, and it creates a level of angst.
So this is my idea for prevention, because you all know I am very prevention, safety focused. And this is why this disciplinary discussion is very hard for me. So, not that I don't believe in discipline and punishment, but I would rather not get there in the first place. So, shouldn't for a student with special needs be identified right away for certain conduct, even at the conference intervention at the building or classroom level?
Boy, you're absolutely right. And if you look at the document, I think it's the last paragraph before the check boxes. There's a preponderance of evidence that we must bring to the board in order for you to consider an expulsion. And so one thing that we have started to ask our school administrators to do, to your point, Sharon, is that we're asking them to look at the strategic plan in particular and to ask the question of themselves, have you implemented these interventions before we start having the conversation around expulsion or even an expulsion hearing? And I want to get to that a little. Let me give the preview to this. An expulsion hearing or an administrative hearing, families will come to you with very sympathetic stories. They will come to you where they will come to, and when I say you, I'm speaking of the board, but they come to the administrative hearings very as well with compelling, sympathetic stories. What we have to do, I believe, systemically, is that we have to meet the preponderance of evidence to show, to your point, Sharon, that we've implemented these components per our strategic plan in order to demonstrate not only to the families and the student, but if we get to the point where we're bringing a case before the board, that we can prove to you that we've done our due diligence. That when we're bringing someone to you, is not because we're angry with them or we're done with them, but we've done the hard work, and they, despite that hard work, they're not addressing things. And to your point, I don't want to ignore it. And we've tried to be preventative in nature, and that those preventative interventions just are not working. That the terminology that we use in special education, I think it applies to regular education students as well. Sometimes you have to have a more restrictive environment if the behavior demonstrates that that's what you need. I think that's what Mr. Meyer is trying to say. If students are putting the safety of other students at risk, we have to do our job to say, we have to now restrict your environment, but we're only doing the restriction because we've done our due diligence with these checkpoints and check boxes that are on the first page.
May I answer that a little bit? Here's two examples. So if we find that these apparently organized fights are being coordinated by cell phones, then at some earlier stage of bad behavior within such a group of kids, we decide that a disposition before they do an expellable offense is that they can't have cell phones in school. I mean, it's not for the purpose of punishing them that we take away the cell phone privilege. It's to prevent that next step, because we see the cell phones correlating with the next step. Another example, and this is sad, but I'll put it in terms of a hypothetical. We say there's a student with disabilities who can't protect themselves and is being bullied by 3 kids on a regular basis. Well, and I don't want that kid with the disabilities who's being bullied to suffer the next bullying offense. And if that next bullying offense, U3, this is going to be an expulsion. I would rather put an aid with the vulnerable student to protect them. Say it was lunch hour, right? That's when the bullying occurred. Put an aid with the student, the victim during lunch hour to prevent the next occurrence that would be the expellable offense. Now, a disciplinary perspective would be, well, you three who are doing this bullying, the next time you do that, you're going to be expelled. My safety perspective would be, we know human nature. This has become a pattern. Let's just protect the victim, proactively protect the victim, prevent the expellable offenses from recurring, and know we have work to do with those three kids. There's a very specific hypothetical that's from a safety perspective that might save 3 expulsions and might save the victim from another occurrence of bullying. Yes, expensive maybe to have that aid there with the student at that time of the day on a regular basis, but that would be the safety strategy rather than the disciplinary strategy.
I know I have a limited time, so I want to answer Ms. Muehlfeld's question by posing the question for you to consider. I'm not looking for an answer tonight. You're all just wrapping your arms around it. But my wondering for the board is when you look at those check boxes on the first page, does that meet the preponderance of evidence that you're looking for if you're sitting at an expulsion hearing? In other words, if we can move our administrators to a place where they can demonstrate that they've done these things, that they've done these preventative precautionary items, and that they can demonstrate that they've put these interventions in place, that if we then bring someone to you, that's no longer an obstacle for you to question if this is a valid case to consider.
Okay, so for myself, it's very hard for me to know what kind of judgment is being made at each level and for what offense. So when I look at the data, I mean, yes, I see out of school suspensions, and not always do I know if they're for 1 to 3 days. What was the conduct? What was the suspension for? I don't know that. And even in school, I don't know that. And then we come to catastrophic out of school suspension for 5 days. I don't have any kind of gauge to know when it's endangering behavior right away or when it's been building and you're going through these check boxes, because what I wouldn't want to happen is on the endangering behavior side that we would go through all these steps when it's endangering and it demands expulsion of a student because of the endangering behavior.
Well, that's a great, may I just ask us then to go to the third page in, and it's under, maybe this is a good time for us to do a scenario. And may I ask, Dr. Hoyt, do you mind reading scenario 1 about Reedy Johnson?
Sure. Reedy Johnson is a 7th grade student at Sunnyside Middle School. She's been enrolled in the district since 1st grade. Upon her arrival at the district, Reedy has been involved in minor verbal confrontations with her classmates. In the 5th grade, Reedy moved in with her grandmother as her mother moved out of town to pursue a lucrative job opportunity. Since 5th grade, Reedy has been more non-compliant at school. In her last year of elementary school, a check-in, check-out intervention strategy was implemented to assist in managing Reedy's behavioral outbursts. Reedy's 6th grade year was marked with an increase in behavioral challenges. Reedy was sent to the office by her teacher a total of 34 times for various non-compliant behaviors. In May of her 6th grade year, Reedy was involved in a fight with a girl she has an on-again, off-again friendship with from elementary school. It is now February of Reedy's 7th grade year. She's been sent out of class on office referrals for a total of 27 times so far this year. Since returning from winter break, Reedy has been more aggressive and confrontational with teachers. Where once before she could be redirected over the past 3 weeks, Reedy has used profanity toward her teachers in class, creating tense and uncomfortable situations for the staff and students alike. This week, Reby used profanity toward her math teacher, Mr. Phillips. She exited the classroom at the request of Mr. Phillips, but not before slamming the door and screaming in the hallways that she hated the school.
So what's next? Is there should we just move towards a recommendation for an administrative hearing, implement additional interventions? Should we do a combination of A and B? Should we meet with Reby's grandparents to determine next steps? Or skip the administrative hearing and go straight to an expulsion hearing with the school board?
I have,
Personally.
right, I have like no numbers in fifth grade. I don't know what strategies have been used. I also am curious about her academics, like, I need a whole lot more information.
Yeah, that's where I landed as well. Like, I mean, this is clearly very concerning behavior. But my biggest question is, what have we done since the fifth grade? So we're talking about really significant behaviors in sixth grade and escalation in seventh grade, continued escalation in seventh grade. And my bigger question would be, what have we done at this point?
I'm so excited to be here this evening. This is very, very fun because there are members of our community who would say Reby needs to go. Reby is putting the safety of students at risk. Why do you need to see anything more? She's clearly inappropriate. She's non-compliant. The kids have known that she's been non-compliant for years. What are you discussing? And so I think this is very healthy that we're seeing your weighing in. So please continue.
So one of the things I would say is I would want to know what other tools do you have? And I think this is one of the challenges we've talked about is that these are all disciplinary.
Mm-hmm.
And that there seems to be an additional set of tools that you need to help support the students changing of behavior. So what are the interventions that are centering safety? Of how do you put some bumpers around the student where there is less flexibility for a period of time so that the student can, maybe for an extended period of time, find ways to regulate, develop additional skills, have strategies in place that they can then take and apply if they're back in the classroom, whatever that looks like. But there needs to be an intensive intervention that maybe has not been able to take place. And I don't know, but that's what I'm reading this as. There's a limitation of options here. And if these are all the options you have, you need additional options and resources.
So Sharon will tell you through her many years of service to the CISA 1 control governing board that there are alternative schools that are provided for kids like Reby that serves all the schools in CISA 1. And I can tell you by late September, the seats are gone. They're gone because all the different school systems in CISA 1 have kids like Reby.
Mm-hmm.
And so the seats, and so we purchase seats every May, I think, or so, around May. This board approves a contract with CISA 1 for services. Part of it is purchasing certain seats in these alternative schools. I can tell you the seats are gone immediately. And typically the only time we can find seats are for our students with special needs. There seems to be more alternative placement opportunities, Dr. Jessup Anger, for those students. But you're correct. I think in terms of intensive intervention, restrictive environment, so we're not putting the educational environment for others in jeopardy. And when I say others, I'm including teachers.
Yeah.
There are not a lot of options available to us unless you create them. So that's the other thing. And again, this is where the board comes into play. Unless you create them and you give us the financial runway to create those alternative placements.
So she would have an administrative hearing
That's what you would recommend?
or no, so she would have an administrative hearing or she wouldn't? Because-
I think it's a scenario for you to you tell us, you tell me, what would you recommend?
Well, I don't know what her situation is.
What would you
Obviously.
So
the
what would you
school-
need to know as a board member?
Well, the school needs to know what her situation is. So, and do we really understand her whole situation? Behavioral improvement plan, obviously, we would have a behavioral improvement plan in place for her, correct? Is that what we would do?
I don't know.
I mean, I think if we were really going to help students who are going through something, whatever she's going through, I don't really even know, is she living with her grandmother?
She is.
Oh, okay. So did we talk to her grandmother? Have we, I don't know. I'm just saying, there's a
Right.
lot here I don't know, and I would ask a lot of questions about that. And how has she affected, there's a certain point now where she's up to 34 times for non-compliant behavior in 6th grade. And what does that look like? How many students did that affect? What were the situations that, if it's just, I didn't want to do my homework and she got sent to the office, or, that's one level of severity. But there's just a lot of different pieces of information here that are missing. So,
I think by virtue of you asking for additional information, you're giving me the answer.
but we don't have any idea what the situation is.
But I think
That's why the board, Dr. Means, is being held accountable by the community and everyone else. But the board does not receive any specific information except for these suspensions.
But what I would say to you,
suspensions.
so-
I mean,
I'm sorry. I'm just excited to kind
that's
of
okay.
jump in.
Okay.
I think the checkbox on the first page, by you saying you need more information, that's a backdoor way of giving us the answer of what your threshold is, the preponderance of evidence that you're asking us to present. In essence, you're telling us what you need. And I think that's really important to center, because there are members of our community who is saying, I was done with Reby in elementary school. And if you guys as a board are saying you need to have all of these check boxes and that information, I think that's the disconnect that is happening in the community. Because I know I receive the emails from community members who are saying, I don't care if Reby lives with her grandmother or not. I don't care if you had a check-in, check-out system. She needs to go. And I think that's the tension that I'm sensing in the community right now.
I'm going to go with Ms. Fraley and then Mr. Meyer.
So really quickly, what I would just say though, is that I think it's really important for the community to understand is, based on the answers to those questions, she may need to go, right? Like, based on all the things we have done. And when I say go, I mean go to an administrative hearing. I
Right.
don't mean expulsion. But I think some of the challenges are around consistency, and like, if she's in 6th grade and 7th grade, that means there's 6 different teachers. Is it certain subjects where all her referrals are coming in from, and thus it's like an academic issue? You know what I mean? So I also want to make sure any teachers that are listening also understand that it's not a, we don't trust you. It's I think because a student's education is a legal right, public education, access, we have a responsibility to do our due diligence to be able to say we have done what we are supposed to make sure that this child gets what they need. And if we can't prove that case, if you will, then we're not doing our job. So,
Mr. Meyer.
Well, two kind of big questions. First, what's the data? Is Reby the kid who 4 years later gets into the knockdown, drag out fight that's on a video, beat down and dragged down the hall by the hair, or some other kid? I mean, is the Reby person, the hypothetical, is that the person who becomes that 11th grade person? I don't know. Right? And we don't have a crystal ball. Okay. The other question is, I would say, and I do think this matters, and I do think the community will speak, is how many Reebies are there? If there's one, we can deal. If there's a lot of them, there are. And, oh, well, one of Reeby's teachers resigned, went to another district. That class that Reeby's in, 5 of those kids who are residents, their parents decide we're done, we're leaving. And that's $70,000 a year revenue. And in how many buildings does that happen? And so it starts to become a strategic problem. And then the community that some say doesn't understand, and there's a disconnect, they say, well, it's this open enrollment thing, and we're going to end open enrollment.
Mm-hmm.
And then, as you know, what that means, we start to close buildings, and the community says, so be it. Close those buildings, because you say there's Reeby's, a lot of them. And the community decides that's the problem, and this is the solution. And so at some point, we have to be able to run the organization, and our measure of what we do with the Reebies has to do with whether all those bad things would happen. People move away, teachers quit, we lose revenue, we start to close buildings. Would that happen? That's what we have to decide, because if there is this thing, if the community thinks differently than the board thinks, and the board doesn't respond in a way the community understands, when the community speaks, that's where it could go. And that's my observation.
But I think there's data missing. There's data from the other parents in these classes. They know maybe what's going on that can help us. And I just don't know, are we connecting? I mean, especially in the 5th grade, it's a little harder in middle school to find out that information until the occurrences happen, or a child is in a situation of, we need to manage the crisis. So, I mean, we have indicators.
Mr. Phillips.
Would it make sense to have this 3rd paragraph be a checkbox, like manifestation determination is held and
Yes.
determined? It's like, I like the wording of this and just wondered if it were not covered in any of the checkboxes below, would it make sense to call that out? And like, if applicable, this.
Yes.
Okay.
Which
I hate
page
to
are you on?
The first page.
First page, like that 3rd paragraph about where a special education student
Oh, gotcha.
to make that be a gateway.
Great point.
And just call it out a little bit more specifically.
That's great.
One of the things that I think is challenging about a situation is that when you have a series of behaviors that are disruptive, none of which in isolation rise to a level of suspension or expulsion, but all of them are deeply disruptive to a classroom. There's almost a tool that needs to be here that's not disciplinary, but is an accountability tool that's a support tool wrapped in one. And I think that that's a common theme that I've often heard from the community of, you're not holding kids accountable. Because we both want to make sure that our classrooms need to be places where teaching can happen, where learning can happen. Ultimately, that's core to our complete mission, right? Some kids can do it, some kids can't. Kids are deeply dysregulated post-pandemic, so we're seeing more of this behavior in more of these students. And we can respond and it comes into play with some of the checkboxes later of sort of cute, immediate responses when we see certain things. But we want tools where we can flow resources to help and support kids before it gets to the big fight.
So yes, I was giving you the wry smile because yes, and the feedback I'm receiving from the community is they don't care. And so I appreciate your esoteric, very intellectually grounded conversation, but there are members of the community who are saying, I just want Reby gone. My child doesn't deserve to be in the classroom with Reby. And I don't want you to make my administrators to have to go through all those different checkboxes to get Reby out. Just figure it. So the purpose of the scenario is for you to set the line. I've worked in school districts with boards who would say, I don't need you to do all those boxes. If the administrative team believes that Reby is a distraction, if the feedback from the staff is Reby is a distraction, let's go through the process. I'm hearing something very different from you, but I want to, this is just the first conversation, right? I mean, and so I'm not going to reach any conclusions from this conversation this evening. Actually, the entire purpose is for us to have a very rich, open conversation of we're calibrating. And I think the calibration is really happening in multiple places. We're trying to calibrate with our administrative team. We're trying to calibrate with the values or the threshold that teachers have and the community, but candidly, even among yourselves.
So one of the things I'm curious about is what is the capacity we have? What I'm hearing is that the ability to remove a student from that space, to have that space be prioritized for teaching and learning. And when kids can't do that, there's just no other spaces currently to place them.
No.
And that's where I'm kind of like there's this middle ground between when a student puts others' physical well-being at risk. That's a clear line for me. But when there is this drumbeat of disruption, how do we remove them, place them in a spot where they can develop skills, not remove them from, I think Ms. Fraley said it well, the public education is a right, so that we're doing our due diligence legally.
But it's a right for everyone.
Yes.
Yeah.
Like that's the thing we have to also keep in mind, which I appreciate that's everyone is touching on.
It's a right for the other 20 students in
Yes.
class as
Yeah.
well.
Yes.
That's
and so
where I
it's
go to the
not
victims, right?
prioritizing
Yes.
one or the other. Sorry, Eric.
And so how do you not say this is the end of your road, but we're putting you on this other track, that we are giving you an opportunity to figure this out and then come back, or not. But you will have to prove your way back into this environment because you have not shown the capacity to be successful in this space. And that's
That's an alternative education setting. Which
And
we would,
and there's
And there are community members who would say, and we listen to you. You keep telling us that you have limited funds. So are you going to build an alternative school system because certain students can't comply with what we expect students to do? And if you're telling us that that's what you're willing to invest your funds in, then that we're not aligned. So that's a really interesting conversation as well, because I know what your response should be. Your response should be, well, we're going to spend it one way or another. We're going to either spend it on legal fees, or we're going to spend it in constantly dealing with all the Rebys, or we're going to deal with it by creating alternative placements.
Or
I'm
we're
gonna
going to lose enrollment.
go Dr. Hoek.
So then that means, so if you go down that road, that means you're saying invest in the legal fees and move the students. So, because it can't be the three, it can't be the third off.
I didn't say any of those choices. I'm saying that is a fourth possibility that some would argue is inevitable if you don't solve the Reby
So
problem.
no one wants to lose those students. So that means we defer to what lane then? So that's not fair to say, well, then you're going to lose students. So then if none of us want to lose students, So does that statement imply that we should then try to find a way to have Reby leave the district? That's the type of direction we need administratively. Because I appreciate the statement. I've heard people share that statement, but then as a governing board, we need your direction to say, Dr. Means, we don't want to lose students, so we need you to maybe not have as many check boxes because we don't want to lose resident students. But we need that level of clarity from the board. And so we're not hearing that clarity. Well, actually, I'm hearing the opposite. I'm hearing you say you want those check boxes and you need that preponderance of evidence.
Not from everybody, sir. Okay, not from everybody.
Well, and I want to be really clear that if we get rid of all the readies, if we're just talking about children as if they're dollars, then we're going to have a whole bunch of empty seats too. So we're going to have revenue losses then too. But that's not, honestly, that's just like not the best way, I think, to think about children and what value they hold in our society.
I agree.
And I really struggle with the idea that we're like, do you guys all remember that movie Minority Report? Where you like convict people and punish them for crimes before they're done. So like, I want to be really careful that we are recognizing high risk behaviors and we're intervening in those high risk behaviors or those students that we consider high risk. However, I don't think we need to be making, and I would feel very uncomfortable making decisions about a student saying, well, I think your track is that in 3 years, 2 years, whatever, you're going to be the kid who's punching kids in the hallway. I would be very uncomfortable with us making any decisions from that end. I will say from my perspective, and this is just, I am one person. When we created our strategic plan, we identified as a board, what are our core values as a district?
Yes, you did.
I don't remember seeing anything in our core values that say our top priorities are obedience. Our top priorities are, I don't know, well-disciplined children. I remember us saying that we're working on having healthy students who learn. We're working on having whole person, creating a whole person at the end of their education to help them function in society. So to that end, if I'm looking at just Reby as an example, if you came to me and you said, you know, we sent her back and forth from the office 34 times and now 27 times, but now we're sick of it. Now people in the community, which I really struggle with the idea of the community, because the community is 50,000 people with all kinds of different values and all kinds of different opinions about this. And we're not getting a full picture of what our community as a whole really probably wants. But if what you're saying to me is now our community is complaining and we're tired of Reby and people like her, and you said we haven't done anything with her though, but now we're sick of it. And I would say you could bring it to me and I can be very clear, I would not expel that student. I would come back to you and I would say, you owed her more than that.
Mm-hmm.
So do something.
Mm-hmm.
And that's me.
That is so clear. And that is such good direction. And that's what I think is going to be necessary.
The only thing I would add is that I do want to make sure, and I'm glad that this is not the only conversation. I do want to make sure that folks don't feel like they cannot bring someone in that kind of situation unless they've checked every box. Like I feel as though we have to treat professionals like professionals. Yeah. And if the belief is we have done what we think is best with the capacity that we have, I can also live with that too, because like I said, I had a lot of questions, but at a certain point we have to be thinking about the rest of the class too. I just want to make sure that we've given Reby or whomever that child is a fair shot. Sure. And that may mean that you get a mistake and then you get a second chance, but third, fourth, like, like I think the community has spoken in a lot of ways to say like, just be clear with kids, because I think one of the things that's biting us in the butt right now is that we've said things for a really long time and we haven't followed through on it. So it's like my own parenting issues. Like when I tell my kids I'm going to do something and then I don't do it, and then all of a sudden I decide today's the day I'm going to do it. Is that really fair? Like it's because of how I'm feeling.
And Ms. Fraley, and then I'm going to go to Ms. Meefeld. There's the checklist on the front page of did these things happen on strategic plan objectives, and then there's the additional considerations and then serious discipline that I think, let's assume that education systems aren't funded to the level to do everything that we want to do for every kid every day.
Right.
The teachers and educators simply don't have that capacity to be that many places and that many things to that many people. And there's certain behaviors that just rise to this level. And it's, if it appears that serious discipline must be levied, administrators are expected to prove at least 2 of these following. This really resonated with me. Of these pieces of the student has demonstrated a pattern of chronic behavior even after interventions have been established. The student's been determined to be the aggressor through a complete investigation. The student's been determined to have engaged in premeditated actions through a complete investigation. The school administrators have determined that the student is a clear and present threat to the ongoing health and safety of the entire school, or the student has been involved in a situation that is deemed a criminal act. The only thing I maybe quibble with is the 4th one. Even if they're not a safety to the entire school, they may be a clear and present threat to another child. Mm-hmm. Or to go to Mr. Meyer's point earlier, if somebody is bullying or harassing or something unrelentingly, that to me, there's an entire school thing, and I'm just intentionally doing something to do harm here. So these to me, there's the low drumbeat of bad disruptive behavior. Mm-hmm. And then what have we done to intervene? Where have that been? And then there's these other pieces. Mm-hmm. And I think oftentimes what we have experienced this year is we have seen these acute behaviors that is described more on this page of some very specific things. And when someone says to me, did we tell them if they couldn't fight? That seems self-evident. Like there are certain things of like, I'm going to say, yes, we probably did. It's in the handbook and it should just be known. And so there's certain levels and expectations of behavior that I think I'm comfortable saying if 2 of these rise to that level, maybe we weren't perfect. Maybe we missed opportunities. I would expect that we, in many situations, likely would, because things aren't always obvious. But if multiple of these have been violated, that to me rises. Sharon.
Yes, thank you. And that speaks to the safe school culture. But what I'm, and really working on that, which should lead to prevention, it should lead to reports, so that we can track things and add them. And then at the end, hopefully we'll prevent Reeve from getting in a fight with a friend. So, I mean, again, this is really on the discipline side, but I'm assuming there's some administrative team that's looking at the students before we get to administrative hearing. In the middle school and the high school setting especially. I think probably it happens more in the elementary school. But this risk and threat assessment, when do we do that? Because I think that was a good point Mr. Phillips made to add manifestation, but I don't see risk and threat assessment, and I'm very unclear when the administrative team, either at the building level or at the district level or both, are surrounding the child and that behavior and making sure all of the things that you have check boxes on are or are not happening.
So this, I want to be very clear. This all starts with strong school principal leadership. Mm-hmm. I cannot, Luke Pinion cannot, Emily O'Connor cannot run schools from the Fisher building. We cannot. We need building principals who are keeping this top of mind. That's number one. Number two, the board approved 2 coordinators for our MLSS system. We didn't have an MLSS system. I think the thing that Luke Pinion would tell you is that the lack of systems in this district was shocking to him. And that's not hyperbole. It was shocking to him. So for a district in 2022 to not have an MLSS system where you routinely, Sharon, meet on a weekly basis and you share, you sit down and say, so how's Reby doing? Reby's been sent out for 10 times. Before it gets to 27, what interventions have been put in place? We haven't had those conversations. And we haven't had systems in place and we haven't documented those things. So I think to answer your question, yes, I think we have an obligation and a responsibility to do all of these things on this sheet of paper. I think the clarity that if this board, as we continue to work through it, if this board says, yes, this is generally where we want to land. This is where we believe these are the questions we're going to ask. This is the preponderance of evidence we're seeking. You need to know there are other school boards who don't want this level of preponderance of evidence. They're going to say, if the administration says Reby's a problem, don't wait until she's in 7th grade. You should have came to us when she was in 5th grade. I'm not hearing that from you, but this is our preliminary first conversation. This should feel like a workshop. This should feel like an opportunity for you to kind of think about this a little bit more and to come back. And I think that's why we wanted to start with me introducing us. And then the next time we get together, it would be really valuable for you to ask questions directly to our school principals. I can tell you that they're going to tell you that the check boxes on this sheet of paper is a hard burden. It is a heavy lift. And so what they're going to tell you is that not only are you expecting me to handle Reby, but now I have to check these boxes just to ensure that you're going to consider this issue. And then the weight of me having to go back to my team, my teacher team, and say, Reby's back because I didn't do certain things on the checkbox list because I have 10 other Rebys. I think that's the conversation I want you to have with the team.
So my victim perspective is I need you and your administrators, Dr. Means, to recommend to us how many check boxes are okay for us to expect before we start keeping 20 other kids from learning. If there's 4 check boxes but 20 other kids stop learning at 2 check boxes, then my suggestion would be we go down to 2 check boxes. I need the other 20 kids to be able to learn in the classroom. So however many check boxes keeps them, I'm not saying this correctly, I'm sure. I want you to tell us what we need to do so that everybody can learn. Everybody else can learn in the classroom.
Well, what I would tell you, this is the first conversation. Let's have more. But what you have told me initially, our initial blush at it, so it's preliminary, is that you want us to at least demonstrate some level of due diligence on the boxes on the first page. You've asked us, so there's no number, but I think you're saying if there's no box checked, there's a problem, right? And so then I think I'm also seeing you, so Dr. Hoyt went to the strategic plan. Those next 3 boxes are, you see in the parens, they're crafted out of the vision statement or the core values. So I would assume that you want us to check at least one of the boxes to ensure that we're aligned with our strategic plan. And then we've already given you a quantity of, we believe we need to hit 2 of the 5 final boxes. So candidly, I think we've given you the answer. So now it's a level of what's your level, this is not an us issue. This is a you issue in terms of what's your preponderance of evidence that you're going to pose on us when we bring something to you. Because again, we've all been in this situation enough. When the families come before you in an expulsion hearing, it's emotional. You feel sympathetic. There are reasons for you to not agree with the administrative recommendation. We get it. We're coming in with the harder weight and the preponderance of evidence to present. The case is easier for the plaintiff to say, this is what you have to do. I mean, it's a quasi judicial hearing. Defense has the burden of proof to present. And if you as the judges are saying that we have this very high level of preponderance of evidence to present, this is not us, Mr. Meyer, with all due respect. It's you. Because again, I've worked in school districts and I had a conversation with a board member last week that said, it was about 10, 15 years ago when there was a rash of behaviors where students were making statements and saying there were going to be threats upon the school. And school districts said, if we find out who's making the threats, we're going to expel you. There's no administrative hearing. We're going to go straight to an expulsion hearing. I know I worked in a district like that, and working with other superintendents, they said that's the only way we're going to get a handle on this. And we did. And so there was clarity from school boards across the metropolitan area that said, this is what we're going to do. We need clarity from you. So it's not about the number of boxes that we tell you. You're telling us that the preponderance of evidence, you're telling us what the burden is.
So there's an important piece that I missed. So for me, board member 1, the preponderance of evidence, none of this. Like, I want all the strategic objectives. I want you doing this because I believe, 1, it's in the strategic plan. 2, I believe it will decrease the likelihood. In an individual hearing, I'm not considering this. I am considering these 5 things.
That's you.
That's me.
I think there are other board members who are going to say, no, you need to do your due diligence and show us at least one checkbox.
No, I understand that.
And we haven't had Ms. Willis weigh in yet as well.
But I want to clarify, for me, it is in cases of serious discipline. And this is different than the low drumbeat of classroom disruption, where I'm like, okay, there's not a big thing. But if 2 of these 5 come up, there's going to be lessons learned of where do we not do things. But
Can we do case study too? Is that what you're talking about,
Well,
sort of?
no, but in what I want to say is, I want us to end at 10. So I'd like to come back to case study 2, but I don't think we're going to do that tonight because I want to get to the last 2 things on our agenda. But I did want to clarify, for me, these pieces do not come into the preponderance of evidence, except maybe I'm wrong in my thinking, but I'm looking at these 5. And that may be I may be an outlier, but that's, if a student's demonstrated chronic behavior, even after interventions have been established, that talks about the interventions.
Yeah.
If the school administrators determine that the student is a clear and present danger to an individual or like, or any, like, in some of it could be 1. So I wanted to kind of like go I might be on the far end of thinking on that, but that's where I am.
I'll make this really short. I think this is super helpful, and I think this would be really helpful for you to actually do it with the new board. And the reason I say this is because we can have all of these discussions, and come April, we have no idea what this board looks like. And so I want you to be thinking about your time and energy. I love the process. I think actually somehow getting this out to the public would be really helpful. I wish there were people here to be reporting back to everybody about what they heard.
We're recording.
I know, but it's not the same as the grapevine. But I would say that, quite frankly, 4 of us may or may not be here. And so what we think actually is less important than what the new board members think. And I would say having that conversation and it could be the first thing you do so that come June, there's clarity on what this means. And so that there can also be a campaign with families and students to say, it's a new day in TOSA. And let's be really clear, and I don't know if it's kids signing contracts, we used to do that in charter schools, whatever it is, parents signing contracts.
Yes.
So that it can't be like, well, I didn't know. And so
I'm with you. I mean, so no matter how sympathetic the case is,
I've had.
if you
yeah.
were told this is how we now operate, that yes,
And it
that's
actually disadvantages students. Like I
Yes.
think sometimes we take a student's situation and we say, oh, these horrible things have happened to them. Absolutely. And by not holding them accountable to the bar,
that's right.
it actually is, self-limiting prophecy. And so if we can say these are the things we did, here were the expectations that were set, here are the things that we tried to do to help you get there.
Yeah.
That's
Well,
I
I don't want to wait. I don't want to wait 3 more months. If we are giving you not good direction and we have situations that have to come before the board, I don't want you to wait. I mean,
And I don't, Dr. Means, 19 years I'm on the board. Still, no one would think I was ever qualified to be superintendent to run a school district. I personally need you to stand up to us, your board, and say that you as superintendent need us to do these things. It's your professional judgment that you need this board to support you on these things in order to educate kids, to tell us what you expect of us. Then it's up to us to say yes or no. That's how I look at it. I don't want to architect the strategy. I need you and Nick over at East and Corey over at West and the other good principals. Tell us what you know we should do as a board based on all of the many decades combined experience you have. Because you know a lot more than me. And I should, yeah. Okay.
I want
I
to,
think they did that. I think that's what September was.
And so I've received, I think the board's received emails from at least one, I've received at least one email from a community member who said, and one of the students involved in the fight on February 14th was someone who was before you. So we've done our administrative due diligence, but then the pushback was from the board, but we didn't reach your level of preponderance of evidence.
But what I'm hearing from you isn't the same as what I'm hearing from some other board members tonight. So that's where I'm like, we got to get this figured out.
I agree.
In this room, the 8 of us.
But what I'm sharing with you, I mean, to your point, I want to be very specific. We did present to you what we thought was best from our years of experience. But what was then applied was a preponderance of evidence that was unclear. And so my job is to listen to everything and then to bring it back. And so thank you for all the conversations. I think this document is something I've never seen before. So I'm really happy that our team has put together, I think, a roadmap for whatever board's in place. But I really appreciate Sharon's comment of, I don't want to wait 3 months. I think this is an ongoing conversation. I think the community is asking us to have the ongoing conversation, but I think this is a framework for us to operate from if you are saying this is the threshold.
Well, for me, lesson learned, when you bring expulsions to us, what you expect, that you've said it very directly here, that my hearing of you is that this board didn't behave like you kind of needed us to do.
I want to be clear. If we bring a child before you for expulsion, that we do not take that lightly. But we've also made the decision that child should not be in our schools, period. We've made that clear.
I've heard your message.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
it's not an intellectual exercise.
Oh, it's not. And nor are we bringing that student before you to scare them straight. We are saying that we've done our analysis. This child should not be in our schools. Now, we're going to be very judicious in terms of what that timeline looks like. I think the Wisconsin statute states that we have an obligation to bring you an expulsion if there's a weapon involved, a handgun involved. But everything else, it's going to range. I mean, it's going to range in terms of what level of services we provide, if it's an expulsion for a semester or a year, all of those different things that we've given a great deal of thought to it before it's before you. we're taking it very seriously.
I'm gonna call, unless Jessica, you have not had a chance to weigh in. You may be fine with that. We'll have a part 2 of this, a conversation 2 of 2, and possibly 2 of more, where we'll be here also with Luke and Emily and
Our secondary
principals to kind of further this conversation. So folks are okay pausing now. We've got some materials here to reflect on, to think about. You can look through the kind of individual case study too, and that one we can maybe bring back for in the next conversation as well.
If Ms. Willis has a chance to speak, I'm good.
And
Like right now, if she
No,
wants to.
I appreciate the opportunity. I'm happy to save my thoughts. I've been taking notes to share kind of as we reflect and revisit this next time.
Can't wait to dig into scenario number 2.
So Jessica, are you good?
Okay, she has notes.
I am good. Thank you.
Okay. I want to move us in great conversation, folks.
Thank you.
This was one when Mr. Pena brought it up that we thought let's jump into this immediately this week, and we knew we could get to this point. So thank you, Dr. Means, for preparing this, and we will agenda another one of these soon. And Ms. Fraley, to your point, I agree that it's important for us to do this in this moment, and the next board it will be important to do it again. The next one is discussion regarding the development of board goals. And I would hand this off to Mr. Phillips.
Sure. So I don't know if you all remember Thursday, January 5th, like I do, but it was an in-service where we talked about where we had a board self-evaluation. And one of the questions that was out there for us to answer was in direct relation to our board goals. And a comment that Dr. Means made was, this is the only board I've been involved in that doesn't have goals. And I was embarrassed, completely embarrassed by that. And so immediately after their meeting, I went up to Eric or Dr. Joseph Enger and said, I want to be involved in creating some board goals immediately. It's January 5th. You know, typically goals are year long. I would love to do that. And he said, funny you say that. Ms. Fraley also said she wanted to be involved. So I got a document together that had our North Star statement. And then underneath of that had examples of board goals, some very verbose, some very brief, and then one that was kind of right in the middle. And so built out a sketch of how do you connect. So the idea is that board goals, or at least the draft that for reaction that I've developed for the team here, is that connect the North Star to the strategic plan. And the goals stay within the purview of the board, right? So staying out of operations, staying out of, the day-to-day of the district, and then threw together some like potential measurements on the way to measure these goals that would be inside of the board purview. So I always feel like in dealing with an executive team like this, it's always better to start from something versus starting from scratch, and to give, teams something to react to, whether it's to scrap it all or to amend it or, but I always feel like work is done more efficiently and better in a team environment if we're not starting from a blank piece of paper. So I spent a lot of time with colors and shapes, which you'll see on a presentation. I love building presentations of how the North Star ties to, I think there's 5 board goals. And then underneath of those board goals, I made very pretty columns about how there are measurements under there, but there are a lot of them. And so I just asked this, when that time comes up, is that, think how you feel about how this fits us, and if it supports this, connects the North Star statement to the strategic plan. And then there's a lot of measurements if we can get down to like one thing we want to measure this year on those goals once we, kind of work together to say like, these are really the goals that represent us. And so when we get time together, I asked Dr. Joseph Enger respectfully if we could get some time as a board to start working on these and then, narrow them down. I was able to meet with Dr. Means and go over them, at a very high level directionally to see if he felt like they bridged that gap between, like that aspirational North Star statement and then like the really tactical strategic plan. And he thought like it was a good start.
Oh, yeah.
But also cautioned like there was a lot of measurements there and encouraged us to work together to, tighten those up to where we can measure over the next year. So that's kind of how it started. Ms. Fraley and I popped around a document for about an hour. And then, so just to help us all get someplace to start. And so that was how that work came. So I would like to quickly have us have some goals so we aren't outliers as a school board. So there you go. So that's how we are.
I know I've got, do people have copies?
I don't
I don't
know.
No, I just sent it to you.
know. And
Dr. Lee.
And I didn't.
So,
okay,
Can you present, Mr. Phillips, what you put together?
yeah, I can. When it's time to work on them, are we going to do that separate?
okay, and I have a procedural request. Under our bylaws, this sounds like an ad hoc committee.
No, it wasn't. I volunteered to work.
I understand, but you're working with another board member, so
Mm.
it starts to look like an ad hoc committee.
Mm.
Bylaws require that an appointment of an ad hoc committee be approved by the board. So
There was no appointment.
I know, well,
Oh.
but you're doing it and you're working with, this is where kind of folks, come on, work with me here, will you? I asked that on March 6th, I'm fine with you continue your work.
Oh, I'm done. I just
Oh,
give us all a starting
okay.
spot.
All right. Well, for future reference,
Yeah.
it'd be nice to let the whole board know ahead of time you're doing this.
Oh,
Yeah, and you say it's an ad hoc committee, and we memorialize it as a committee that did all this good work, and that when the next board is seated, maybe
Yeah.
with at least 3 new board members, that they see, hey, this previous board had this ad hoc committee, and this is the work they did. They thought it was important. So I'd ask that in the future. Now, if it's one board, I'm trying to not be nitpicky. I'm trying to, kind of this collaborative spirit that we all know about this and, oh, good, you're doing this work. I'm so busy. I'm sure glad you guys are doing it. Thank you for doing this work.
sure.
Okay? But I'd like us to get into that kind of process where we share, hey, people are working on this,
Mm.
and because it's good work. And so we
Well,
want
we'll
to,
see.
right? Well, I know you too. You do good work, right? So it's
We
not just.
Actually talked about the goals. I have
Yeah.
not seen this
Oh,
presentation.
No, she hasn't even seen it.
Okay. So by reference, I marvel at the wonderful thing that you did for the finance committee with the the grid that says our schedule for everything. And we first time in a couple decades we've had something like it's
key.
really good work. Well, this is good work, I bet too.
We'll see.
So let's make you a committee and
Oh, I don't want
I
to
think,
give you
and I
glory,
think we
right?
want the board, I think at this point, and again, we can scrap this. I was not involved. It was shared with me
when I was done. Yeah.
when you were done. So I think what I would say is, has it been shared out now?
where is it?
Can you present, please, Mr. Phillips? I would like to see it. And I want to make a note for the record that when Dr. Jessebanger brought to us the actual North Star, he did say, and he did mention
Yep.
that Mr. Phillips did
Yeah.
draft something at that time and that he would bring it back to us.
That's why the North Star is color coded.
Right. And I bet it's so good.
I borrowed his
Yeah.
Yeah.
slide. I just pulled his slide for the North Star.
Yeah.
And what I would say is this all, the 7 of us, we can, this can be a starting point or not.
Yeah.
So I think at this point, what I would like to do is have people take a look at it. Mr. Phillips, if you're okay walking through it with us, in maybe planning 8 to 10 minutes.
Sure.
And then so high level, and then we can talk about it. And if we wanted to now say, hey, we'd like an ad hoc committee to look at this, or say, no, this idea is good, but let's start fresh, or we just use governance sessions to say, oh, in the midst of everything else, I skimmed this really quickly. The thing that I appreciated about this is it really does, like, it's basically, I experience this as building off of the North Star, the strategic plan, and this piece of rising to the governance level goals resonated with me. I think it resonated with me. I'll see how your presentation goes. Then I'll give you a thumbs up.
We're sharing.
I lost it.
You were sharing, now we're
I
just
know.
seeing it.
Now you're sharing
Hold on, hold on. Here it
email.
goes.
Yeah.
Okay. Because I'm sharing inside of there. We go. Okay, so so what I tried to do is pull out the action or like the essence of the North Star. You know, academic achievement, excellent educators, support and resources, and then hold ourselves accountable, and then develop structures and systems. Like, so I just wanted to pull out what's the essence of the North Star that could then turn into board goals. And so if you look at the blue text, it turns into the blue goal. The next page. So you can see how the goals are tied to the North Star. And at the center of the goals, the most important one is academic achievement. Relentless commitment to the academic achievement of all students, no exception. Pulled right out of the North Star. Culture and community, what does that mean? Respect, transparency, you know, we all want to agree on that. High quality staff. So the goals are pulled right out of the North Star. But the biggest one is in the middle, huh?
With, it's like one of the things you had said, which I thought was on point, was like the hope being that every single board member can literally like tick off those 5 things. Like, it shouldn't be like you have to have the North Star memorized, but you should be able to be like boom, 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 boom.
And then if you go down to the next page, you can see where started developing like what would be some of the ways that you would measure success around those goals. And there are a lot of ideas in there for us to consider. And so, you know, if we all align, then the hope would be to pick the one. I can't scroll all the way down for whatever reason, but pick the one that like we really want to have us get us started on this first year, you know, 2023, because these would need to be done every year. Yeah. So that was a thought.
So thank you for recognizing me. We've had need for constructive outlets for disagreement with things. And it seems to me like, you know, disagreement about how the board is operating. It seems to me that looking for a constructive path here, that if the community in some fashion has, for example, complained about things, whatever, that we look at our goals and we say, well, is that a valid complaint? You know, once we take it out of the, you know, the anxiety of a complaint being a complaint and somebody come with a microphone and just, okay, let's be humble and say, you know what, we need to put that stuff into our goals in some succinct way.
Mm-hmm.
And when the community comes to the microphone and says, you know, you didn't do this, or you did that, you shouldn't have done that, that we can say, you know what, we're going to put this as part of our assessment scoring. That every year the board scores itself, and we are faithful to hearing this input.
Through our self-evaluation.
Through our self-evaluation.
And that informs the next iteration of these
And
goals.
yes, you could file a complaint, you could do this, you could do that, but this is where we hold ourselves accountable to each other.
Yeah.
And I don't know that like the effective government, it's like stakeholders feel knowledgeable, engaged in the board decisions. I'm hoping for more, like all the board feels knowledgeable and engaged in board decisions, right? There's supposed to be 7 of us. And so we give a constructive outlet for people to express their heartfelt, sincere grievances with us. And we take it out of the anxiety context of that it's been in. And we say, you know what, we're going to hear you on that. And we meet once a year we're going to consider it in the interim, but we're going to tune our goals here. Right? I mean,
Yeah.
I hope you see what I'm saying. I
I
get
do.
too wordy, but
No.
this
How to
would be a
take feedback
place.
and turn it into action.
Right.
Yeah.
You know, you don't like community comment. Well, okay. Yeah, or how we're handling it,
Mhm.
whatever. Okay. Or what time you have the meetings, you know,
Mhm.
all this kind of stuff, not, you know, so maybe this is that place.
Yeah, this is just for us.
It's a
for us.
platform
Yeah.
to proactively address this anxiety, tension, or whatever that's going. I don't like how I was called on, or I don't like, you know, they had too much time and I didn't get enough time, or Meyer, you interrupt too much, or Meyer, you get the floor and you talk forever, you don't be quiet, you know. Okay. Thank you.
Well, my hope is that, you know, so like to wrap up with a call to action, my hope is that we can spend some time with these, feel, you know, if you feel like it doesn't represent you or it doesn't represent what we want to accomplish in the next year, let's make some notes. And then to take a look at the measurements and really think about for you, like what is that one thing? Like if you, that feather in your cap, like in academic achievement, what is that like for us, right? For this next year. So that would be my ask, is that just take a look at it as a starting point, as a draft, and see, you know, how it feels.
And that would be a reason for a lame duck board, meaning that 3 people are going to be gone. That's the term lame duck in politics. Why would a lame duck board do this now? Because the veterans are about to leave.
Well, and it's
Yeah.
embarrassing that we don't have this.
Yeah.
And it's
Yeah.
February 20th. And we found this out almost 2 months ago. So the time to have something to guide our work is past. And so I feel a sense of urgency for us to get aligned and execute this so that it's an example for the next board as they're 9 months into their term, 8 months into their term, that they'll have a good thing to build upon.
Well, statement of your experience. Pass on to them.
I'm going to go with Ms. Bufeld and Ms. Fraley. Ms. Willis, if you've got anything, I'll come to you, and then I'm going to do a wrap up and kind of next steps. Ms. Bufeld.
Thank you. I just see this as a point of alignment, whatever timing that is. I don't expect we're going to get grievances. I would hope not. I would hope that the more we are aligning, the more we are communicating, the more we are following through. And with a lot of the other systems we have in place now, hopefully, just like we're talked about in our last session on discipline, I would hope that this would mean we would have more engagement up at the preventative and creation level. So, everyone would be aligned and we would be communicating better, which is really communication is always challenging. So I see this as a continuation of our board work, and I love that it would be connected to the board evaluation. I think that would make it much more meaningful.
Ms. Fraley.
Kudos for the alignment piece, for the codification piece. One thing I'm hoping we can think about sooner versus later is what is the data that we want to collect, even if we don't think it's a priority for this year, so that we have some baseline data. I don't think we've even begun to use Culture AMP like we could. And so I'd love for us to think about, like, what are the questions that we want to ask specific to the board in terms of the community, in terms of staff, et cetera. I'm guessing that we may or may not be thrilled with the data that we get, but I think we'll give the new board a good starting point, not just the actual scale, but also the comments. And so I would love for us to be able to, speaking for myself, before I step off the board, being able to see like what the progression is, like what is the immediate priority, what's the next priority, et cetera, and what is the timeline? Because it may be that these things are revisited in 6 months versus waiting again until this time next year. And I'd love to hear from you, Dr. Means, what would be the calendar, the cyclical calendar that you would recommend so that this is in alignment with strategic plan, your personal goals, et cetera. Yeah, so like I'm thinking of the chart you made for finance, right? Like how do all of those things intersect in a way that really allows the board to be more strategic? And I also wonder, as it speaks to responsibilities of board positions, if we want to, policy committee, look at like what the job descriptions are for certain board positions so that everything is not landing on the role of president. Is that, you know, does the vice president actually drive forward this piece, or, you know, something else to make sure that we're staying on top of it?
Thank you. That's great stuff. Ms. Willis.
Thank you, Mr. Phillips, for your work on this and the color coding. I think I really love how it connects back to our North Star. The only point that I wanted to share is I hope that we have points for check-in, you know, as we look at these goals, you know, frequent points of check-in so we can recalibrate. I love all the different options that you had to measure them. I love how it aligned to our strategic plan, because sometimes, you know, I think Dr. Means and his team does a great job with aligning some of the work that the district is doing with the strategic plan, but I don't see us as board members or as a board doing that. So I love that alignment, but just making sure that we have clear points to check in, to recalibrate, and are we hitting these goals, and how are we measuring them? And I think to Ms. Fraley's point, like what data are we using? So that's the only input I have, but thank you for this.
What I will do is I will agenda this for a kind of ongoing in-service discussion conversation going forward. Mr. Phillips, I'm going to look to you to kind of drive the conversation of that. Clearly, a lot of us are going to be involved in it, but I know this isn't, you did some early work on it. And so for the next 2 months or so, until the 28th at 12:59 p.m. 11:59 p.m. That we'll keep moving this forward. And I think, thank you for bringing it forward. And I appreciate the early thinking. I would ask my board colleagues, the Wauwatosa board goals are really the North Star. They're pulled straight from that. I think where we have, in one we can land on, does that feel right? And have that conversation. I think the measurements, I would love for folks to do some thinking about what feels good to you. Where do you, and do some reflecting and thinking. Then we can bring that forward. That I think in particular, I know I've got a lot of thinking to do about that, and I'm early on in that process. So do some individual reflection, thinking, note taking, and then we'll bring it back, and we'll look to do this now in the next 2 to 3 weeks. Our last item on our agenda is discussion regarding bylaw recommendations, and I asked Dr. Hoig to get us kicked off with this piece.
Yes, I will make this relatively quick. I would love for everybody, does everybody know how to find the Neola policy, where that is? So I wanted to highlight a policy, a bylaw that's going to be coming before you soon, which is 144.5, board member behavior and code of conduct. So I think this ties to all of the things we were talking about previously around, you know, being responsible to the community, to our district, but also to each other. And this to me is where we really spell out what that looks like. So our current code of conduct is not very specific. If you've looked at it recently, it's pretty general. There aren't a lot of specifics under the sort of policy. This one, as you can see, is much more robust, and includes some enforcement if specific. Yes. Can you
I
not
thought
find
I
it?
knew where it was. I went
That's
to the
okay.
only policy templates and I'm not
I'm
seeing it.
not finding
Okay.
it either.
I thought I knew where it was.
So you have to go to policies.
Do you want to display it? I could display it.
Under draft. Okay, thank you. I
Yeah,
knew I'd
draft
seen them
Neola.
before. Thank you.
Because it is long, so I certainly can share it if that is easier for people.
So is it policy manual 713.9?
Nope,
Policy
it's the Neola policy templates for processing.
Okay.
And then if you go under bylaws and then scroll down to 144.5. Yeah, a lot more robust. So what I would love for people to do, again, this is going to be coming in front of you. As you can see, there's very little on here that is like an option. If you see like an open parenthesis, that means Neola offers that as an option. So the one that I see on this specific one is under board member use of electronic communication. Other than that, this is kind of like the standard policy that they would recommend. Now, we may want to tweak this, we may want to add things, but I think it's helpful for us to think about our sort of
Okay,
pain points.
I'm sorry, I still don't, can you do something to communicate this to us? I'm not finding it. I'm in Neola policy templates.
You
Okay.
have to go back under draft.
Oh, are you under draft?
Okay,
Maybe
I'm
display
trying to
it.
get
Would
there.
that be okay?
Yes.
You're okay.
Where?
Second drop.
Yeah,
Scroll. So maybe it's not as cool.
yeah.
Danny, I can share my screen. I have it up.
Yeah. Here. Wait, stay here. Don't go away till I find.
There we
it.
go.
I know. I.
Thank you. We see it in the room.
144, so you're gold.
Oh.
0.5.
144, 014.
Yes.
Oh, okay. I'm not there yet.
You're so close.
I know. 1445.
Right there.
Okay,
You're in.
here we go. I'm in.
So I know that this wasn't distributed in advance. I don't expect anybody to necessarily have points they want to bring up now, but what I would suggest as you're reading is, I want to be thoughtful of the, sort of what have been our sources of pain as a board over the last, well, I can only speak to my term, so the last 10 months. And to see if there are ways that we feel like those things are addressed in our code of conduct. Again, this is all to help us be hopefully a much higher functioning board.
And
all
will
of these
this
things.
come before us at the next meeting, or there will be like a reading of this, like all the other policies?
Yeah, there will be, yes, this will
So
be
this
coming
is
up.
just a
It's just, I think,
share, reflect.
yeah, it's one that I'd like to have people give a little bit more thought to and conversation around than maybe some of our other first read policies where it's kind of like, okay, Neola said yes, let's move on.
And if we have thoughts, should we send them to you individually, to Dr. Jessifinger, to send? Okay. So any thoughts to Dr. Meeks? Got it.
So the pathway for this will be, this one, because it's so different from previous policies, you're bringing it here, asking for kind of drawing board attention to it.
Mhm.
It will go to the, it will go to the policy committee for conversation there.
Yes, 1 week from today, we'll be looking at this as a policy committee.
Then it will come after the policy committee makes any recommendations.
First read.
It will come for a first read,
Yes.
and then it will come for a second read. So this is kind of like almost like
Pre-read.
a pre-read before it gets to policy, recognizing it's substantially different and worthy of kind of an additional spotlight for the board to get comments to Dr. Means, who can then work with the policy committee in that meeting a week from today. So I would say but by the end of the week, if you've got something, that would be good to get to Dr. Means so that he can inform the policy committee in that meeting of, here's some questions the board had, some thoughts that they can attend to. So when it comes back to us, some of those things have been thought through and considered or are presented back to the board in a thoughtful manner. Is that fair?
Yeah, that feels fine. Ms. Willis, do you have anything that you want to add about that?
I don't. Thank you.
So I have a question on the, obviously the enforcement piece is brand new. And I mean, I do see the enforcement piece as some other boards also have this sort of policy in place. But where did we get the language? Was it from Neola?
This is all Neola's language. Yep.
Okay.
Which would mean that it is in alignment with the law and sort of what we're able to do as a board to enforce code of conduct.
Any other board questions on this one?
Sure. I haven't had a chance to read this.
Yeah.
There are a lot of laws, like the Public Records Law, the Open Meetings Law, the First Amendment, the U.S. Constitution. I'm not sure when you make, it's a rather sweeping declaration to say it's in alignment with the law. So I just caution before we get to a conclusion in that regard.
Well, I guess what I mean by that is that we pay Neola
Mhm.
to guide us to make sure that our policies are in alignment with Wisconsin statute.
That's a good answer.
Right. And there's no reference to the Public Records Law and the Open Meetings Law at the bottom here.
Well, it does. So if you look at, and again, I didn't highlight specific things, but it says be familiar with and follow applicable local, state, and federal laws and regulations. That's one of the general expectations of a board member. So, and there are other bylaws that are going to speak more directly to things around open meetings, walking quorums. That's a different, where that's fleshed out as a different bylaw.
Now, I look at this now, the removal from board committee assignments. I've been explicitly told by multiple attorneys that a removal from a board committee assignment as retaliation for exercise of First Amendment rights can subject you to a federal legal claim. So beware, folks, what you think you can do here.
So could you bring us forward more detail from Neola on that particular section, please? I have also seen this in Wisconsin state legislature and, other areas here on enforcing. So, but any information they could bring to us would be helpful to help clarify, since it is new for us.
Absolutely. I will
Okay.
ask Mr. Zimmern. He's very up to date with the law and also like what cases have come before the law or before the legal system, which ones have kind of been proven out and which ones haven't.
And the only thing I would add, because I think Dr. Hoig has done a nice job in giving the overview, is that Dr. Zimmern he states almost at every meeting that Neola is able to support the language of the policy if there is no modification or personalization of the policy by a school district.
What's with it then?
You start messing with it, then Neola will back away and say, we can't endorse this legally. So if there's any question around the legality of the language, I think Richard will tell you he stands behind it 100%, that it has gone through the legal analysis that is necessary. And I think that's why Dr. Hoig and Ms. Willis have stayed away from modifying it.
Yes, that's a good point. I forgot about that.
So thoughts, recommendations, questions, curiosities to Dr. Means by end of week or over the weekend. Policy committee, and you're welcome to go and sit and listen.
4 o'clock.
You could do that.
4 o'clock.
4
Monday,
o'clock
4
a week from today. That could play out in that way. And then they will bring whatever recommendations they have, come back to the board for first reading. So think of this as pre-reading, policy committee work with some informed by some pre-reading feedback possibly. First reading and then second reading and adoption, amendments, changes, whatever the board may ultimately decide. So this one's just getting a little bit more of a spotlight on it because it's a pretty substantial change for us. Ms. Fred.
When we're done this topic, is there any non-agenda comment time? Okay.
I don't think we're Jennifer.
So then how do I ask a question that may require the board to weigh in on something. I've received multiple requests over the last week about campaign, like how people. Can I ask you, and then if you need to go back to the board, because I think the timing of it is important.
A reminder, our normally scheduled board meeting for next Monday is backed up 1 week. So we will be here 2 weeks from this evening. No board meeting next Monday, but a policy committee meeting at 4.
Let's go board meeting.
I will be in Boston, so I will not be here for it.
I haven't just. Okay, forget it.
It is 9:56 p.m. I think we had hoped for a hard stop at 10. Well done, team. May I have a motion to adjourn?
Move to adjourn.
Thank you, Sharon. May I have a second? Thank you, Ms. Fraley.
Ms. Muehlfeld?
Yes.
Ms. Fraley?
Yes.
Mr. Meyer?
Yes.
Dr. Jessup Banger?
Yes.
Dr. Hoyt?
Yes.
Mr. Phillips?
Yes.
Ms. Willis?
Yes.
Thank you, Kelly.
And we are adjourned. Thank you all very much for some important governance conversations tonight.